So that's where we are so far. So we haven't got any ticks on the list yet, but let's have a think about the purpose of journalism. You've come to spend the next 3 years talking about journalism, studying journalism, practicing journalism at Salford University. So what's the point? What's the purpose? So this is the first point. I'd like you to just to go away and think about what you think the four main purposes of journalism might be. So once you've done that and you've jotted down the four main purposes of journalism, don't have to think about what would please me. I'll not know what you've written down. Just think about, for your personal view, what are the purposes of journalism. So press pause, do that. When you've finished and you've got your list, press play again and we will continue. So welcome back. So looking at the purposes of journalism, so I went away and thought of a list of what I think of other purposes. So see how your list compares to these. So I think it's about informing people, telling people information, and that's useful. But then a phone directory is informative, but it's not particularly interesting. So it's not just about information. An important element to me is holding power to account. That is to say that when people are using power, whether through money or through democracy or influence, whatever it might be, it's an important part of our job is to hold that power to account so that people can't abuse that power. And that includes us. That includes the power that journalists have should be held to account. And we'll look at some examples of that shortly. We should use it to influence. We should use journalism to influence the world and to obviously influence it in a positive way, to perhaps to campaign. But we shouldn't be ashamed of entertaining people as well, interesting people. There's no point spending your life writing stories or producing radio or TV packages which nobody reads or nobody watches or listens to because they're boring. So being entertaining is important. So that's the purposes, but I think it's important just at this very beginning to start thinking about the point and just thinking about the significance of what it is we do, because it's different to a lot of other subjects. I would say it's different to any other subject that you might study at university. So, anyone recognise that little boy? You may have seen him a few years ago. Well, that's Alan Kurdi. So Alan Kurdi is a tragic story of a young boy who was fleeing Syria, I think, with his family because of the war that was going on there. And as they tried to make their way across the Mediterranean, their boat sank, and Alan Kurdi and other members of his family drowned. Now, unfortunately, his story is not unique, and many hundreds of people, including children, many thousands of people, including children, have died trying to cross the Mediterranean. His body was washed up on a Turkish beach. And the reason Alan Kurdi, his death was more significant than just simply the individual tragedy is that there was a picture taken of a Turkish police officer scooping his body up from the waves and carrying him up the beach. It's a shocking picture, and for some people it was too shocking, and they I know the BBC declined to use it, but on the front pages of all the national newspapers, pretty much all the national newspapers did use it. And it was at a time when the debate around immigration and migrants coming into the UK was very heated, and there was an awful lot of emotion, people pushing back and saying we shouldn't have so many migrants coming into the country. This picture changed that debate quite dramatically. You can see here's from the Daily Mail. August in 2015, that's the year that Alan Kurdi died. Their front page, migrants, how many more can we take? You might say that's not to be unexpected from a newspaper with an agenda like the Daily Mail, but then 1 month later, September, there's their front page, tiny victim of a human catastrophe, and it changed the tone of the debate. So it was obviously an individual tragedy, but it was an important story, and it did change the tone of that debate. And Alan Kurdi's death undoubtedly saved the lives of many others because of the more compassionate tone that British immigration policy adopted. Other examples, again, the Daily Mail. You may have views on the Daily Mail, but when Stephen Lawrence was murdered, Stephen Lawrence was a black teenager who was stabbed to death by a gang of racists in London. And that gang were basically escaping justice through largely the failings of the Metropolitan Police, who failed to investigate and follow up effectively. And it was through the press and through journalists, the actions of journalists, that some of the people who murdered Stephen Lawrence were brought to justice. So whatever you think of the Daily Mail, that front page was a very powerful journalistic victory. And two of the people who murdered Stephen Lawrence are now behind bars. That's not entirely due to the Daily Mail, I would add. The family of Stephen Lawrence being remarkable in the way that they've pursued justice. But it's important to see the impact that we can have as journalists to seek justice. Daily Telegraph, again, you may not be a Telegraph reader, who knows, but the whole expenses scandal for Parliament, that was driven by the Daily Telegraph initially. They're the ones who got the data which showed that MPs were fiddling their expenses and led to a massive scandal and a reform of the way that Parliament works. So again, that's the power of journalism. News of the World no longer published because of things they did which were entirely unethical. However, they did have very positive achievements when they were publishing. Something called Sarah's Law was introduced following the death of Sarah Payne, this little girl. She was abducted and murdered by a convicted paedophile, and her family campaigned, along with the News of the World, for a change in the law to allow families to know whether a paedophile had been moved into their area, and that has led to a change which means that families can now find out whether there's convicted sex offenders living in their area, so that people can take precautions against the risk that brings. And we're not immune from monitoring ourselves. The Guardian, the whole hacking scandal about journalists hacking into private voicemail accounts, that was revealed by the Guardian to expose the work of the News of the World and others in the way that they were hacking into voicemail. So as I said earlier on, we're not above our scrutiny. We should hold ourselves to account as much as anyone else. Lots of other examples. Even the Financial Times, again, you might think is a boring paper, but the work of journalists, the Financial Times exposed the way that young women were being exploited at business dinners by a particular organisation, and put a stop to that. And you can see the impact that investigation had. It went across all other media as well. So that's the point and the purpose of journalism. So you should be proud of what we do. So when people are perhaps saying to you that journalism, that we all just make it up and there's no point, and people perhaps have a negative view of journalists and journalism, you should be willing to defend your profession. It's a noble profession, and when you do it right, it's enormously powerful and a force for good. So there's reason to be proud of what we do, and the impact of what we can do can be immense.